What if burnout isn't an individual thing, but actually a predictable result of the system that we're currently in? Hi everyone. Welcome back to Page Turners with Katja. It's been a while. I've stepped back a lot to manage some severe flare ups from stage 4 endometriosis with my gut, bladder, and bowel having fused together and all sorts. So, been figuring out what helps, what doesn't, and which treatments actually made things worse. So, after 7 years of chronic anemia, I've reached a normal blood count almost, and it's noticeable. My energy is definitely up. So, thanks for checking in, sticking with me, and to my Discord group for all the literary conversations still going on, especially around reading the Globe. But today we're talking about The Burnout Society by Byung-Chul Han, a short but mighty book about burnout and the kind of world that produces it. I'm going to walk through the argument as it builds because each section sharpens the point, so it's a bit of a deep dive rather than a general overview. Now, Han begins by arguing that the dominant illnesses of each era tend to reflect the structure of that society. In the past, it meant that bacterial disease like plagues defined an era or the influenza, but now we're living in a different kind of age, one more defined by neurological and psychological conditions, depression, burnout, anxiety, ADHD. When I first read this book, it landed differently from how it does now. Because while I was looking into causes for and how to treat endometriosis, I came across research on chronic inflammation in general. And one of the more striking points is that any form of chronic inflammation doesn't just affect the body, but rewires our brains. Most inflammation is accompanied by varying levels of pain, and our brain matter responds to those signals. Now, for women with endometriosis like me, it is thought to result in a diagnosis of ADHD later in life. So that was fascinating because I was experiencing very close to when I had been confirmed as having endometriosis. I had begun to experience ADHD like symptoms. So I was like, this is making a lot of sense to me. So when Han talks about neurological illness as defining the conditions of our time, it starts to feel less theoretical for me. Stress and exhaustion are not just emotional states, it can affect brain functions. And that makes his argument uncomfortable and yet reassuring. Reassuring because it's not an individual experience, and uncomfortable because it's a result of our lives, our current system that we're living in. My first reaction, though, was still a little bit of skepticism because I was like, are we predominantly in this neurological age? Because I'd seen, discussions linking endometriosis to fusobacterium. So perhaps we're still in the bacterial age, but not really. Because what he's saying is you still have all of these ages, but what's stacked on the top is now chronic stresses creating our neuronal age. So that is predominant. It doesn't mean that the other things are gone. And things in the neuronal age feel like a feedback loop between how we live, how we work, and what happens in the body. Not just feeling tired, but measurable strain, inflammation, nervous system pressure, changes in attention, which leads to the obvious question, why are we so stressed? And Han brings in Michel Foucault's idea of the disciplinary society first, a world of rules and restrictions of you must not. And he says that we've built on top of that with an added layer with this achievement society. So rather than you must not, it becomes you can, and more insidiously, you should. Where everything is framed as an opportunity, it becomes much harder to recognize pressure as pressure. That means things become internalized. We manage ourselves, we self-police, even when no one is explicitly asking more of us. There's a sense that we should be doing more and being more. So Han's argument is quite sharp here. The disciplinary society produces criminals who broke rules. The achievement society produces depressives because failure becomes personal. We have this neuronal dis-ease. And importantly, that isn't limited to people who are visibly struggling. You can be productive, successful on paper, and still not feel good enough or believe you're not good enough. Even winners aren't outside the system. And that means we're lacking in freedom. And I agree with him, though in some ways, particularly as a woman, I do feel more free legally, socially, materially. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 years because we seem to be backsliding a lot, but I still get the point. Regardless of gender, we are living in a system where things that push and pressure us feel like they're deep seated and internal because they are. And one of the most striking ideas in the book then becomes that the exploiter and the exploited are the same person. He called it auto-exploitation. And then we go on to how we experience time and attention. Han argues we've lost the capacity for deep boredom, the kind that allows thought to develop. Instead, we fill every gap: phones, noise, distraction, another task. And he distinguishes between shallow boredom, where we're waiting for something, and a deeper kind that creates space for us to reflect. And the achievement society doesn't allow much room for reflection. Everything becomes part of what he calls vita activa, a life of constant activity. And even rest becomes functional, getting minimum rest to, work again. And that feels really familiar. It's not just that we're busy, it's that we're busy without much depth, which of course feels a little bit triggering because, we're out there grinding at work to pay the bills. From there, Han shifts to attention. He suggests we've lost the ability to really see, not just look, but sustain attention without immediately turning it into output, which admittedly makes this video slightly ironic because as I was reading, I was thinking, this is, how am I going to do the book review? But that said, I did think deeply about it because he points out that the arts become really important. Deep reading, deep listening, engaging with art, even just sitting with thought aren't, passive activities. So without the drive to create a video, for example, you could still be inspired to complete a book review in your journal or to just sit with your thoughts about something. You don't have to put it into a visible action. So yeah, it's something he calls the pedagogy of seeing, essentially retraining your attention. Now, he also then goes on to a literary character, that's Bartleby from Melville, the scrivener, who responds to almost everything at work with, I would prefer not to. Now, Bartleby doesn't just protest, he doesn't argue, he's just he's basically opting out. And Han reads this refusal as something the Achievement Society doesn't know how to process, because in a system where activity is framed as freedom, a simple no becomes really difficult to recognize or accept without being labeled as failure. And so why would Bartleby choose failure? Of course, Bartleby's opting out was to the extreme. I think what we see these days is what's being called silent quitting or quiet quitting. Not something I can opt to do because I, worked and worked for 2 decades in the health system and now I'm freelancing. So I can't silent quit on myself.
And editing Katja here, just to say, one of the reasons I've gone beyond for all the jobs is always because I found something that I really loved. So being in the health system and doing advocacy work as well. So I think that's one of the reasons I haven't done the silent quitting. But I can tell you that there were certainly days that it was very tempting, especially when you work 9 to 6 minimum and then do a 4-hour commute. Well, in total, so 2 hours, 2 hours. But yeah, I totally understand why people put up the boundaries if they feel that they're not cared about as workers. But as a freelancer, again, going the extra mile.
But I think that is, the less extreme version of Bartleby's opting out as a response to the system. And that leads us on to pathological tiredness. Now, Han distinguishes between 2 kinds of tiredness. There's the kind that follows meaningful effort, the work that allows you to rest and return to yourself afterwards. And then there's the more isolating kind, a tiredness that doesn't resolve, it just leaves you depleted. And the difference seems to be whether that tiredness exists within a supportive world where you can reconnect with other parts of your life, or whether it leaves you with nothing outside the work to fall back on. And we're almost all tired. And the exhaustion isn't just about feeling bad, it's about making resistance to the status quo less likely, because if you're depleted, you're not really questioning as much or reflecting as much. You're simply trying to survive and get through the day. So, Han's central point is that burnout isn't just personal, it's structural, and it's not driven by repression, but by excess. Too many demands, even those framed as opportunity. And because that pressure is internal, burnout becomes moralized, something to fix, which of course feeds into our burnout society. So I enjoyed that language, the language of the discussion, and the fact that this book is a lot more accessible than some of Han's other works. And also the description of why exhaustion feels personal, even when it isn't, is an easy argument to understand. So I enjoyed that stance. Why freedom can feel like pressure, why rest can feel uncomfortable or even wrong. In fact, on that point, I don't know when I last slept in or had a full 7 hours sleep, but I did recently have a full proper afternoon nap. And before I did it, I felt so guilty. There was this resistance that it was lazy and it was wrong. And why? I mean, the 2 days before that, the day before that, I had had 4 hours of sleep, and the day before that, 5 hours. So 9 hours over 2 nights is really not enough. So why should I feel guilty about having an afternoon nap? I don't know, but it's there. And because of my own health situation, I couldn't read this book purely as theory. So, stress isn't abstract, it shows up in the body as much as the mind. If burnout is built into how we live, then maybe the question isn't how to fix ourselves so much, but how much of it we're actually willing to accept or self impose. So, maybe the fix is to stop self imposing rather than trying to impose and fit in to a system that is flawed in the first place. So that's it. Thank you for watching. If you've read The Burnout Society, I'd be interested to hear what you made of it, whether it resonated or not. And if you haven't, let me know what you thought of some of these key ideas from the book. That's it. Take care, and I'll see you next time.